Okay, hello, this is me being silly and having to record my presentation on my camera. Okay, so first I'm doing the Rimsky-Korsakov selection. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. It starts off with talking about the melody. He says that the melody must always stand out and that you can make it stand out by being either artificial or being natural. To do it artificially, the tone color is not what makes it stand out. It's not the color and the combination of different sounds. Rather, it's just due to different accents and different dynamic levels. And then doing it naturally is when you do focus on the different combinations of tone color, and the sound and the relationships between the instruments is actually how the melody stands out rather than dynamics. Then he talks for a second about melody and the strings. Strings in the past have been and often will be the greatest candidate for the melody. It's best to use both the first and second violin to have a bigger, a fuller sound in the melody in the orchestra. And then he moves on and spends most of his time talking about harmony. The first thing he talks about with harmony is talking about understanding the harmonic picture of the piece. He says that the composer should picture himself the exact harmonic structure of what he's going for. He should know, in terms of the theory and the harmonic structure, he should know exactly how it's shaped, and he should know the progression and what goes to what, etc., etc. He must understand how it's constructed, and he talks about how every addition or subtraction of parts or voices must coincide with the transition. If there's another part added, another voice is added or subtracted, it needs to be as a result of going into new material. You can't just be in the material you've been working through and kind of arbitrarily add or subtract a voice. And then he talks about the number of parts in the harmony. He says usually the harmony is really only constructed of about 4 parts. If there's 5th, 6th, or 7th, or even 8th parts, it's usually just doubling of one of the basic 4 musical parts. That's really a safe way to do it. He also talks about inversion rules. He says that the base of inverted dominant chords and the 7 chord and then diminished 7th chords must never have the bass doubled in any of the upper parts. It needs to be in the bass. That's where the base of those chords has to be. And then he talks about different pedal bass lines. I think in the notes I just put bass lines, but it's referring to pedal tones and pedal lines like that. And considerable use is permitted, he says. You can use it a lot more in orchestra because there's a whole lot more voices, and so the amount of color overall with the different voice parts and all the music going on in addition to it makes it a lot easier to use. So it's kind of helpful in the background, but it's not for the certain sections of the harmony where it doesn't necessarily fit. It doesn't stand out as much as a big sore thumb because there's so many other voices and so much more color involved. So you can use that a considerable amount, he says. And then he talks about the distribution of notes within the chords in the harmony. He says as you go higher in the harmony as a whole, there needs to be a smaller and smaller distance between the notes. So when you're really low, you can have a greater distance and the intervals can be larger, but the higher you go, the smaller the intervals needs to become within the key. And the bass, he says the bass should not ever be more than an octave from the next the next voice part. So either the baritone, or in terms of voices, it would be between the bass and the baritone, or the bass and the tenor, stuff like that. It should never be greater than an octave. This I was a little bit confused by. Hopefully I'll have some clarification when I get back, but I think he's saying that the use of sixths within orchestration and orchestrated parts rather than the use of fifths can sometimes be more effective. And then in terms of the distribution of notes, he talks about when you have diverging lines in the harmony, there should be an increase. Generally speaking, there should be somewhat of an increase in the number of notes between the top and bottom lines as they move apart, so that you don't end up with these two diverging lines and then this enormous empty space in between. He says that's something to definitely be avoided. And then conversely, if you've got two converging lines, you need to go from many more voice parts to proceeding towards fewer and fewer and fewer until you either come to unison or just come to however many you're going to end with. But the further apart they are, the more you should have just to make up for the big space. And that's pretty much where it ends. Okay.